All right, hello everybody. I'm here with Quinn. We are here to talk about AMP code. Quinn is the CEO of Sourcegraph, who has built several products to help coders understand code, and then in this case for AMP to help people actually do the coding part. The reason I wanted to talk to Quinn is because I kept hearing, like I paid the $200 Claude Code thing, so I use Claude Code a lot, and I kept hearing about AMP, and so I was really interested. I wanted to try it. I'll be teaching an AI coding course here in a few months, which AMP's graciously agreed to give students some free credits so they can, you know, try out all the new techniques on it. Um, and I want to teach the best tools, the best techniques. And so I gave it a shot. I did a tool review. I don't work in the abstract very well, and so I'm like, well, here's an open source task. I actually need to do it. The maintainer asked me to do it, so let me try AMP for that. It worked great. It was merged and all that. From there, I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper and say, because like there was a few things where I was like, I didn't expect it to go that smoothly, but obviously those feelings can be a little bit subjective. Like sometimes things feel great and aren't great in practice. And so I want to do some
Glad we exceeded your
comparisons.
expectations.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was a good experience. And and like the free tier has a few credits, and like it didn't even come close to using the free tier, and it was a real task, so it was great. Um, since then I've bought more credits. So they fucked me, I guess.
Nice.
Um, Yeah, and so then I was like, okay, well, so did this kind of get lucky? This happened to be an Amp's wheelhouse, or is it really something here? And so I started doing some comparisons. I recently, I just published something where I was comparing it for like an infra task. So because Brian Bischoff was like, oh, I don't like AMP at all for infrastructure, and so I'm like, well, let me try an infra task with Claude Code. Let me try it with AMP, see how it does, compare not just the overall feel, but kind of in detail, like, okay, well, how much memory is it provisioning? Is one more efficient? I found that AMP did a more appropriate memory provisioning. How are the health checks? How does it do on the CI/CD creation? So, in terms of not just functionality, but like, how does the code feel taste-wise? And I found that AMP, performed better. I got the job done with both Claude Code and AMP, but I liked AMP better, and so maybe we'll talk about that some a little bit later as well. And so with all that, that kind of leads me to naturally be curious about like, okay, so I liked AMP and then I compared it and it seems to be working better for me. So like, why? Like, what is the difference? And there's lots of possible answers that I could make up, but it's much better to hear from the people who built it that actually can provide some real answers. So that's what we're doing here today. If you have any questions that come up through the course of the conversation, feel free to answer them in chat. I can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we will get to as many of them as we can. I'm dropping a bunch of links to AMP and Sourcegraph and reviews about AMP and all that stuff in the chat. So yeah, go open a bunch of tabs and look at them after the talk. So that's kind of the intro. So I guess I figure we can jump in with, do you want to give a little bit of an overview of like AMP and like why create AMP when there's lots of terminal agents, there's lots of coding agents, like what are you trying to solve? Like what's the angle that's high level at least that's making AMP so compelling?
Yeah, we built AMP because we felt it needed to exist. There's nobody building anything like it that was trying to be the very best coding agent, unconstrained in every way. And when you figure out why are they building other coding agents in different ways, a lot of times companies build it to kind of sell the thing that they have already, or they are trying to target a niche. There's a ton of devs out there who just want the very best. They want, what is to kind of look ahead at the future, 12 months from now, how is everyone going to be coding? And that's how we're building AMP. And we can get away with that uniquely because we're Sourcegraph. So we started Sourcegraph originally with the vision to automate software development. At the time when we started, though, AI was nowhere near good enough. And we started out with code search. We got all of these customers that have grown to trust us. We've got 4 of the 6 top US banks. We've got every dev at Uber and Stripe and OpenAI and all these big customers. Because of that trust and because of our experience with that scale, we were able to get away with stuff and build the very best product that they really wanted, that didn't offer model selection, that kind of clunky drop down with 17 models, that doesn't have a capped price because that's simply not possible, that's multi-tenant, that can ship constantly. And we set the expectation that everything is changing because we want to be, again, building for what the future is, not what today is. I think we've all seen that, Cursor leapfrogged Copilot, and then now AMP and Claude Code are leapfrogging Cursor, and things get obsolete so fast, and we don't want that to happen to AMP.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, let's jump into like the most common question that I've gotten. I've got an answer, but I'll hear yours, which I've gotten from people, which is like, you talk about this very best unconstrained token usage cost, because it is the very best. That's at the top of like the AMP owner's manual. So like if somebody wants to try AMP, but they are like afraid to because they don't want to get like a surprise bill, or they want to know how much it's going to cost them because they don't like, I pay the $200 a month cloud subscription, and like it was great, and I just used Opus all day, and now all of a sudden like I'm going to be limited. They're like tailoring it back.
Yeah.
And so Cursor did the same. So maybe that's just not sustainable to say unlimited everything for a flat price. So I guess if people want to try it, how do they think about this like token usage thing and make sure that they, I don't know, are in control of what they're paying you?
Yeah. Well, first, it's super easy to try it. You just go to ampco.com, get started. And as you mentioned, we give pretty much everyone $10 in free credits, which gets you a really long way. And for people that are considering, should I pay $200 to something else, or, the usage pricing to AMP, a couple things to keep in mind. The average user on AMP spends about $8 per day, and you get a lot of usage out of that. And if you multiply that, depending on how many days per month you work, hey, props to you. If you're working 31, then it's going to be more than 200 a month, but not that much more than 200 a month. But I think the most important thing is we want to help you reach the top of your craft. And that is worth way more than 200 or 300 or whatever dollars per month it's going to cost you in AMP. And with AMP, you can bet on this. It's going to be around in 3 months. It's going to be the best in 3 months. And I think everyone has had this experience of getting their workflow tuned to something like Cursor or Copilot or Claude Code, and then realizing actually that's not future proof and they're going to have to switch. With AMP, we want to make it so that the smartest, the most ambitious developers can rely on that, can trust it. And it is going to be just as cutting edge 12 months from now as it is today. And maybe that's going to cost you a little bit more in that time, but you're going to have a better experience throughout, and you're going to get deeply integrated, familiar with the tool. I think anyone who's getting to the top of their craft really gets to know their tools. Like you get to know your editor. Like if you're building a house, you get to know your power tools and so on. That's the promise that we have.
Okay, great. I mean, I think every company CEO believes they're going to have the best tool in 12 months. So why don't we dive into like some of the specifics a little bit? So you talked a little bit about you're going to have the best tool because you can focus on it. Like you're not, you don't have a massive model selection. You guys do some model selection. Obviously Claude Code probably isn't going to come out and start serving Gemini models if they end up being the best, like they don't necessarily have that same flexibility. So I guess what are the what are the things that you do that will like keep you ahead? Is it like model evaluation and choices? Is it like just prompting tricks? Is it something else?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I want to start out with what I think is the most important. And this is the fact that when you're working on a team, then everything you do is shared. And this helps you understand how the best people in your team are using coding agents. You get to learn from the best. So Thorsten on our team, really smart developers, for those of you who know him, I can see what he's doing 2 minutes ago. I can see how he's prompting. There's nothing like getting to see how the smartest people on your team are actually using coding agents. And this idea that AMP is multiplayer is something that we've done from the very beginning. And it only works if you have a tool that you can keep using and don't need to switch. Because there's probably some hacks where you can make Claude Code or Cursor or other things like that multiplayer. But if your team is scattered across a lot of different tools, you're not going to get that kind of visibility. And then,
Have
we
you
got,
seen a lot of like the a lot of the clients or AMP users that use this in commercial setting, like using that for like training or onboarding or things like
yeah,
that? Or
yeah, absolutely. It's, it's like, it's not only useful for training and onboarding, you get the social proof, and you also can staple the thread link to every PR. So, after you do this, you put this link in the pull request, and it saves a lot of time in code review.
oh, great.
So usually when AMP gets out in a team, it spreads a lot faster, and it feels more like something you're doing with your team. It feels more fun. So that's a big thing that nobody else has. When you actually get into using AMP, let me pull up my editor here. So we just today rolled out GPT-5 support. I've actually been using that. You can see that AMP is a lot simpler. There's no model selector. If I have a new thread, it's just this. It just works. And that's what we hear from a lot of people. It just works. I don't need to worry about, am I locked out because of a rate limit? I don't need to, worry about which model am I using. I don't need to worry that if I'm using an auto model selector, is it giving me a bad model? We want people to always know that AMP is going to work really well for them. And this simplicity is great. I cannot tell you how many customers, tell us if they are in something like, let me pull up Cursor. Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
While you're
Zoom is
pulling
not
it
really
up, I know.
showing it.
While
Yeah,
while you're working on that, I always feel like I love the model selectors. I can pick anything I want. And then in practice, I'm like, I set it at something and then I leave it and I never change it. I never end up, using it as much as I feel like
yeah,
I mean to, I guess.
yep, that's right. So, I mean, here I am in Windsurf, and for some reason, it still has Claude 3.5 Sonnet. It's got a bunch of these that are grayed out. How do I figure that out? All of this stuff, legacy, it's just so much more complex. And um, we we've talked about a ton of people, and they're still using like old bad settings. So you don't have to worry about that at all. We've also got a really nice CLI. And I think a lot of people have probably been pleasantly surprised with how much the CLI has taken over use for coding agents. CLI for AMP works the same way that our VS Code extension works, all the same logic. And we are doing so much in the terminal that, like this animation here, some of the just really fast UI and refresh that makes it feel really smooth. So all of this stuff too, everything you do, you can go view it on the web, you can share it. So it's all connected. That Orb is very nice. And if you, use GPT-5, then, that works as well.
Awesome. So you mentioned just adding in GPT-5, and I guess that leads me to the question, because you don't have to, select all these models. It's a lot simpler. So how do you guys how does AMP pick the models? Because you have to make a choice at some point. So how do
Mm-hmm.
you go about evaluating models, choosing? Because you have like base models, and then you have the Oracle model, which I think the user manual said is like O3 or whatever. So how do you go about picking like what these models are, which ones are going to be best for people? There's everything from like private evals on a set, and then like Simon Willison has his let's draw a pelican riding a bicycle. There's like a huge range of how people evaluate these. How does AMP go about that?
Yeah. First, just, how does everyone else go about picking models? Usually there's a new model, and on the day it gets launched, you add it to a dropdown in your product and you say, go use this model. It's really good at this. The creators of it say it's the best at this. You go use it. It's a bad experience. And it's just, some more cruft in the UI. I think everyone's been burned by that, even when it's a model from one of the best foundation model companies, and they have evals that say it's 2% better. Like, what does that even mean? Greg Brockman today in the GPT-5 live stream said it exactly that, which is people are getting sick of these evals. What's the difference between 97% and 99%? They've been saturated. And we have seen that. We don't participate in this kind of charade. So when there's a new model that we're evaluating, you actually have to rip out 30 or 40% of the code in AMP and completely change that to see how does that work. You have to change the schema that we use internally. We have to change the system prompt. We have to change so many things about the product. And with GPT-5, we've had to do a ton of work working with OpenAI for the last several weeks to tune it and tweak it. It's not just another selection in a model dropdown. And the reality is, we've been working with GPT-5 for several weeks. We still don't know if it's better. And that sounds crazy, but if you recall, Claude 3.5 Sonnet came out last June, and people didn't really explore, fully understand its agentic capabilities until December or January. And we knew at the time, back last June, that 3.5 Sonnet was really good, but we had no idea of the capabilities. Nobody did. And so with GPT-5, we're not coming out today and saying, oh, this is the best. I think there's some other companies that are, and they're driven by business or pricing considerations, marketing considerations, perhaps. But for us, we only want to have what's the very best for our users. So we've got it out there. We've collecting a lot of feedback from customers now using it in the wild, and we're tweaking and tuning it. We're keeping notes on what we're seeing. We view evals as it's not, going to help you choose which model is better or not. There's no eval that can truly capture that. That's one of the things you can use. You can also use evals for regression testing and making sure that really key workflows are still working. But our view is it's not like GPT-5 is going to fail for those and Claude Sonnet 4 is going to work. It's so much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the idea of like, if you could have a metric that would measure how good someone codes, you'd have the problem solved. But there's
Yeah,
always
people have been talking about measuring developer productivproductivity for
right?
decades, and still nobody is doing that. And some people got
Still, you have
excited with
people doing
AI.
lines of code, and you're like, what does
Yeah,
that even mean?
exactly.
So
Yeah. Lines of code is better than a really dumb metric that takes, 3 years to design and still is dumb. But, it's hard because it's trying to represent fundamental complexity in the universe.
So I guess what I'm hearing here is for your evals, you take them. Um, the evaluation is, you keep an eye, you see what, obviously you look at any data that you've got on the actual metrics of how things are performing, but the meat of it is how it's performing on tasks that you guys or users are actually trying to complete. Does that
Yeah.
sum it
Yeah,
up?
that's right. And then just fixing bugs. Even on the live stream today, if you looked at them using GPT-5 and Cursor, there were several cases where it was exhibiting bad behavior. It was, running a command pipe into cat. Why does it do that? It shouldn't do that. There was, URI error. And there's a lot of that where developers have just come to accept that from tools like Claude Code and Cursor. And I don't get that. We have the ability with AMP to go really deep and fix those. And we can't fix every single thing. There's some model behaviors that are really hard to beat out of the model, but we go deep and actually fix that. And no matter, how deep we need to go, because we're not having to build this abstraction layer that works with 17 different models.
So when you say you mentioned this a couple times with like you change out models, it's not as simple as just adding a drop down selector. You're tweaking it, you're working on it. You fix these like small behaviors and how it implements things. So like what are the kinds of things that you're tweaking and doing and changing to make these models perform better?
A lot of stuff in how the tools are presented. And one example is when we're asking the model to perform a task, do we tell it to call tools with an absolute file path or a relative file path? And some models were trained on a lot of tool calls that have absolute file paths. Some tools we see using URIs, but we don't think that that's in their training set. And so we think that works worse. A lot of stuff around the interaction between the user, the editor, and the agent as well. So, who's been in the situation where the agent is making edits and then you make an edit as well, and the agent overwrites and clobbers that edit? There's a lot of stuff about how do you present what the user has done outside of the agent's worldview back to the agent in an efficient way while still maintaining, prompt caching so that it's still fast. There's a lot of stuff around that. And, I want to be clear. Sometimes we work really hard to do this, and ultimately we can't get to a point where we feel the model is really good. We were really optimistic about Gemini 2.5 Pro a couple months ago, and we're still working with Google and the DeepMind team on this. But we found that it was not, high level, it was not as agentic, and there were just a number of bugs in the tool calling harness. And so, we did all this work running basically a parallel version of AMP that we were building alongside the main one that uses Sonnet, and we ended up not shipping it. So we're hopeful that they're going to address those things. And if we can be in a world where there's not just two, but there's 3 state-of-the-art frontier models that are really good at agentic coding, then that is amazing. That kind of competition is going to make everyone better off.
Great. It seems like people in the chat like what you're saying. I've got lots of comments here about what do we say here? Love the positioning here. Quinn, AMP is for professionals. They like the team tenants. Perhaps it can show who has better evals and metrics and prompts and context used to grow together as a team or across teams. I think the absolutely happens to me once the agent is done, starts editing, and then it gets overwritten. I think that's talking about the clobbering you're talking about. So I think a lot of people are have experienced some of these things you're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to show something here so we can talk in some specifics. I'm just going to share this, and this was just published today, so hopefully I share the right screen. All right, you should see a little table here. Does everyone see that? Yeah. And what this is I was doing a task where I was like, okay, I'm going to have Claude Code, I'm going to have AMP, I'm going to have them both. I'm going to try and use them both, starting with the same prompt to build a simple app. The app wasn't the point. And then say like, okay, cool, let's Dockerize it. Let's deploy it to fly.io. Have it actually help me to pick, do I want fly.io? Do I want Railway? Help me make that decision. Deploy it to there, then build CI so that every time with GitHub Actions, so every time it picks, it goes. What you'll see here right at the top, it's no surprise you can complete this task with both Claude Code and AMP, they both had a little bit of a stumbling where, I would have liked to have the Docker container run locally. In Claude Code's case, it didn't even try. In AMP's case, it saw I wasn't actually running Docker and it couldn't and moved on, which, might be fair. I would have preferred it, it stopped me and tell me. But then when we get into like a lot of the details, we see like Claude Code had this health check route, which is great to have. The problem is there was a bug, so it didn't actually work. And, AMP's had the same health check route, but it routed it correctly and it worked. AMP prompted me to say, you said simple. Does that mean in-memory storage, or do you want some sort of persistent storage, which was really great. And so I ended up with more of what I wanted, even though, it's like I didn't specifically tell either of them I want persistent storage. It hadn't crossed my mind to ask for that. But AMP prompted me, and Claude Code kind of went the simple route.
And
there's
were the
also
initial prompts the same to both tools?
Yep, I started with the initial prompt. In this post here, I've got like the prompt in here, and I've got some of my thoughts as well. And there's other stuff like Claude Code provisioned it with more memory than it really needed, which is a little bit of a cost thing. In this kind of toy example, it doesn't really matter, but it's just a little bit nicer that it provisioned a little bit more something more appropriate for the app. AMP asked if I wanted, when it made the plan, it asked if I wanted to include linting and testing in the CI since I didn't have it, which, I like. I could have said yes or no. I opted for yes. But I like that it asked and was like, hey, you probably should have tests. That's cool. And then AMP also had a really nice thing in the CI that Claude Code didn't, which is like once it actually, the CI ran and it was deployed, it would actually check the health route. It would do the health check and say like, okay, it's deployed. In theory, everything passed in CI, and it would do a final verification to make sure it's actually live. And so, they both got the job done. But there were quite a few things that were, just nicer about the AMP experience and what ended up happening. And so, I guess I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on like what are some of these, like some of them it's like, one just had a bug in the code and like one worked and one didn't. That's pretty cut and dry. But for some of these, um, do you have any thoughts on the kinds of things that impact that kind of like push it to have these, I guess, nice behaviors? Are these do these come down to some of these a lot like a collection of a lot of these small details that you were talking about versus using relative versus absolute paths, how the tools are worked, or is this kind of something different?
The nice thing about how AMP performed here, and thank you for running through your feedback, has been really helpful, is that the ways in which AMP is better. It's not because we have told it when you're making a fly.io app, make the health checks here. It's a very scalable way, which is all we think about is what is going to make the product the best. So one thing that AMP does better at the very start of a lot of tasks is our code-based search agent is better. It uses a lot more tokens, uses more LLM calls. It does more kinds of looking around your code base. And so it's more likely to find patterns that you're using elsewhere and reuse code, for example. We didn't tune it for your task, but that is one of the reasons why it could have performed better. Another thing we have is called the Oracle. And it's something that if it's trying to do something particularly hard, or if you invoke it specifically by saying, use the Oracle to do this in AMP, then it's going to go in very smart sub agent and really think about what it's trying to do. And sometimes if it finds itself getting off track, it's going to go into that automatically. So I don't know exactly what it did to perform better in some cases than Claude Code here. But it's things like that we're able to build, because all we think about is what's going to make the best product. If you're at Claude Code, you're also thinking about, if we have this sub agent that is introduced, that's going to use a lot more tokens. Is that going to cost a lot more on this all you can eat plan? Or will that work for Vertex and Bedrock? Or, will that work? We might need to use a different model that is not in the Anthropic family, and they can't do that, but we can for all of those things.
Yeah, that's great. So, if anyone wants more, like more of my thoughts on all this, go here. I think we kind of covered a lot of those. So you mentioned this idea of there's an Oracle model that can be used sometimes automatically, sometimes you can, ask it to use it. So that kind of, I guess, hints at the fact that there's different models that might be used depending on what you ask it to do. So how does that work? If I ask for a really hard task, you mentioned, it might use this Oracle model for some of the reasoning. If I ask it, give me an example of an if statement in Python, does it kind of do the opposite and use kind of a simpler model because it's a simple task? Like how does the dynamic picking of models work?
Yeah, let me show the Oracle here. So I asked AMP to look at a particularly tricky part of our code base and help me simplify its concurrency model. This is something that, I really want to do. And by saying use the Oracle, it does this. And this is using the O3 model. Very soon is probably going to switch to using GPT-5. And what's cool about this is because, right now, until today, for everyone, Claude Sonnet 4 was the only top agentic model in AMP. O3, it's different, completely different model. And you can think of it as giving a second opinion and a very smart opinion. And so it will catch a lot of things that the other model, that's the main agentic model, misses. And it is also really trained to go really deep into it. So we've heard a ton of people say whenever they've got, a big set of changes, they ask the Oracle to go and review it. Or if they've got a particularly tricky bug and they can't figure it out, go have the Oracle do it. Thorsten, one of the lead developer of AMP here, used it, and AMP found out the reason for a bug, and it was actually some code that I introduced 28 days ago, and it found it, and it actually, in that case, the Oracle usually will take 3 to 5 minutes. In that case, the Oracle ran for 30 minutes, and it actually beat him to figuring out the source of the bug. He was almost there himself, but it returned and it found the source of the bug. So that's where we're delegating to an even smarter model. We're not, and I don't think we will ever say, oh, this is a Python if statement, let's use a dumb model. I don't think our users would want that. And it's hard to know, but there's in general more ways that we can use models with different characteristics in AMP than any other product, because there's a lot of search tasks where it's not, the subagent that's doing search is not actually trying to be intelligent or suggest the solution. It's just trying to find relevant files. And that's where we can use, I wouldn't call it a dumb model. The interesting thing about that model that we can use there is that it's much faster and it's much cheaper, so that for the same price, you can have it scan through a lot more of your code and then present the files that might be relevant to the main smarter model for further investigation. So we've got some prototypes that are using the Kimi K2 model, also really interested in Qwen 3 Coder for that. So there's a lot more ways that we can use other models. And just in the last week, we've had Opus 4.1, we had GPT-5, obviously, GLM 4.5, and just, slightly before that, Qwen 3 Coder, Kimi K2, the GPT OSS models. There's so many more models coming out. And it's a shame if you're using a tool that can only use one of them, because they do have different strengths. When you run inference on things like Grok and Cerebras and Base 10, the inference can be incredibly fast. And that is a direction that people haven't really explored with coding agents. So there's so much more that we can do. And it's so nice where all we have to do is change something in our code. We can push out a change in 10 minutes. Every single AMP user benefits from it. Whereas, again, if you're Claude Code, you have so many more kind of cost and infrastructure considerations. If you're Cursor, you got to get all your users to switch to the different pricing model, and then the model selector and all these things. And so, there's so many models being used under the hood right now, and that's only going to grow. And sometimes people say, well, AMP is great, whatever, but I still want a model selector. The problem is we simply could not do that because it's not one model selector. It'd be like 17 model selectors pretty soon. Right now it's like 6 different models, and that's only going to grow. So that's the future of these tools. And, it's just like a little peek into some of the stuff that we can do differently.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you hear about all these models and it always seems like they're coming fast, and then when you realize just how many of them are and you have this model selector, I think people find their favorites and then they sit on that favorite, that's their favorite for everything. And it's I don't know how feasible it is for an individual developer that's getting stuff done to truly spend a lot of time evaluating and knowing for every model what's the best use of that model, which ones are good at more than just
Yeah.
broad strokes. So even if you have the model selector, like, has anyone in this call actually evaluated all the ones that Quinn just mentioned? And that's just a subset of them. I think it's a challenging problem for sure.
Yeah. Even getting API keys that work for all of those
Yeah.
is quite difficult. Bring your own key is another thing that a lot of people have asked about. And we actually had it in AMP at the very beginning. We tried to make it work. Bring your own key is valuable because then it can be directly billed to you against your Anthropic account. But at this point, it'd be like, bring your own keys, and you have 5 different keys to put in, and it's really tough. And then also bring your own key. It makes it so it is so much harder to evolve the product. And if you have a product where you're using build your own key with it, just know that 30% of the brain cells of the people building it are devoted to making bring your own key work, and 70% of their support tickets are related to bring your own key. And that means that the product that you're using is worse. There's no free lunch. You cannot have bring your own key and the very best product. It's simply impossible. And this is coming from someone who has spent tens of millions of dollars on software developers and team to go and support this inside of the biggest banks in the world. It simply does not work. And even the banks have realized that. They want the best product. They don't want bring your own key.
All right, interesting. That's good. Yeah. And yeah, I just recently spent way more time than I wanted to figuring out how to get my Gemini key to work. Because then I got my Gemini key to work, and then for some reason it wasn't linked to the right billing account, and it's a mess. So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel for you. That one is particularly difficult.
Like,
It's been difficult for us too, but we've solved it for everyone. So you don't need to do that with AMP.
that's great. Um, All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. So if people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try and get to as many as we can. Otherwise, I think we'll maybe move on to some, you know, uh, maybe I'll make a little feature request here and see what you think, and then we'll go into some practical tips for people of like what should they use and how to get started. So
Hmm.
one of the things I use a lot from models, particularly when I'm writing, like I write a lot of blog posts that have screenshots and stuff in there. Um, are multimodal capabilities. So I love like going through and whether it's a video that I take or I take like screenshots as I go through something and then I dump them in a folder and I say, like, help me make sense of this, and I transcribe stuff and it can understand the images, and so it gives me a really good start. And so I found AMP's pretty good at that. I'd always used Gemini before, but AMP is doing great at those images stuff. One thing I noticed, however, is that it doesn't work with PDFs. So I was going to ask about that. I ask a lot of people about PDFs because a lot of companies, and I work with a lot of legal companies, have a lot of PDFs. Is there any thoughts on PDFs for AMP in the future?
Yeah, we definitely should make it work. I know that the models often have a special way of supplying them PDFs. It's not just the bytes of it,
Hmm.
and we should do that. I know you mentioned that, and some others have. So let me here. I mean, we can. The nice thing about building AMP is um, we can say there, and we can see what it comes up with. So in a couple minutes, I can report back with how much work I think it would be, or maybe it'll
All
just do
right.
it.
Yeah, all right. That's perfect. All right. So that's great. Um, cool. So I guess the last questions I've got for the 8 minutes left. Is there anything else that you think have going where AMP is going? You've mentioned just kind of continuing to potentially, increase the models, and as there gets more that have useful things. Are there any other kind of big rocks that are coming that are going to help people that you can share at least?
Our motto is everything is changing, and so we have dreams, and there's no roadmap because with new models coming out to completely change the world, it's impossible to have a roadmap and stick to it. So we're going to make GPT-5 as great as we can. We're going to make a call on whether that's the best model. We think that asynchronous agents, where you can be at your kid's soccer game and kick things off from your phone, have a ton of potential, especially for doing quick things, for giving you a bunch of work to come and sit in front of and review when you get back to the office, or doing things at large scale. I think those are really interesting. And then we're just excited for all the new models that have come out. I mean, there could be no more model development for the next 5 years, and it would still keep us busy. And we know that those people are not stopping. So
Yeah.
AMP is
So
growing really fast. It's like, a lot of weeks it's like 50% week over week growth. So it's growing crazy fast. And thanks to everyone who's trying it out and sharing feedback.
all right, great. So we got a couple questions came in. What challenges do large code bases provide, and how does AMP address kind of that work on very large code bases?
We have a lot of people that have massive code bases, massive monorepos. AMP is a monorepo. So we got agent.md support in subtrees, so you can sprinkle them throughout the code base to help it understand the conventions and other things. And they'll only be read if that subtree is being worked in. We, in general, have this unconstrained approach. And with GPT-5's bigger context window, we're excited because that means that you can go on for even longer. We still need to see the quality of GPT-5, and that's why we're saying try it, but it's not the main default one. Versus other things that limit your context, or sometimes we'll switch to a worse model, which will perform even worse on complex code bases. But I think when you're working on a large code base, the most important thing is you probably have a large team, and what people have done in the code and who knows how to use agents in the code is really important. And that's where AMP's fundamentally multiplayer aspect. You can see what people are doing. You can see why did someone make this change in this way. And if you're using any other tool, Cursor, Claude Code, Windsurf, whatever, all that context is lost. So that, I think, going back to the first thing I said about AMP, is that multiplayer aspect. That that is really valuable. if there's more that you think we can do to make this better, then please let me know.
Awesome. Next question from the chat asked, can you tell us about the recently introduced orb in the CLI? I don't know what that is. So if you do, that's great.
It's that beautiful like animation. Here, let me
Oh,
let me share it again.
I
It's
must have just,
this thing
oh,
right here.
gotcha. Yeah, I saw that. I skipped over
Yeah.
that. I didn't even think of it.
And
Oh,
there you
cool.
go. Uh, people seem to love this. So you will see some more orbs showing up in AMP. And if you don't like them, then, well, let us know.
Tough luck, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, humans seem very drawn to orbs.
All right, so last wrap up here. I know I've said that a couple of times, but I keep having questions. It's very interesting. So, for people who are just about to start, I guess, what are some of the features that you think like power users use, whether it's a prompting technique or an AMP specific feature that new users kind of miss that you see like people who use it a lot do, or favorite features that you find most useful. Any advice for people who want to start and would rather jump the learning curve a little bit?
I think using the Oracle, just at any point, say use the Oracle to do whatever if it's some particularly hard problem that you have. And also, what we see a lot of power users doing is if they see AMP not quite solving their problem, go back and edit your first initial prompt to make it better. And the difference there is, let's say that you don't go back and edit the initial prompt, you end up having a long stream of conversations. I mean, think of if you're a person and your boss tells you to do something and then kind of switches and then is unclear and does that 17 times, your head is spinning at the end. If instead they gave you really clear guidance at the start, then it's going to go a lot more smoothly. And that's the very dumb analogy, which is explaining why it's better to go back and edit that initial prompt. Just go back and be clear. And AMP does all the right things around resetting the file state when you do that. So it should just work.
All right, perfect. Well, we are just about out of time. Thank you so much. I'm going to put all the links to Sourcegraph, to AMP code that you can get started, some of the blog posts that I've mentioned, the course that I mentioned that AMP's been so kind as to give a bunch of free credits to users who sign up. So if you choose to do it, that's a great way to get started. Any last things you want to share with people, Quinn? I think we've had a pretty comprehensive conversation. Anything you want to point people to?
Be coding. Go try AMP, and we want it to be the very best. So if it's not, if you have any feedback, please let us know. We ship constantly, and probably 6 to 8 times per day we ship new releases, and about 50 times a day to ampcode.com. So send us feedback, and happy coding. We'll be coding too.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much. And yeah, let me know after this how you tried it. Tag me, tag Quinn on Twitter, LinkedIn with what you tried and how it went. Thanks a
Thank you all.
bunch.
See
Bye.
you.